Welcome to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Coming up on today's show, we'll tell you why the Tea Party Republicans are still obsessed with destroying health care and damn near everything else. Wall Street is raking in billions of dollars by manipulating the commodities market, and we'll tell you how they pull that scam off. And conservative media is circling the drain. We'll talk with progressive radio and TV host David Pakman about the destruction of the right's most powerful talkers. We have all that and more coming up, but right now, just remember, you've stepped into the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
It has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
The Tea Party's been trying to dismantle health care reform for almost 4 years, completely ignoring the facts that our health care system is broken. And their attacks are becoming more and more intense. I have author and journalist Paul Waldman with me now to talk about those attacks. Paul Waldman is the author of the book, Being Right Is Not Enough. Paul, great story on the Obamacare battle. It's just like they can't get enough of hating Obama. They can't get enough of hating Obamacare. And you know, we know who's behind it. It's the corporations. It's the billionaire inheritance babies. It's the same Koch brother group that rallied all the Tea Party types at town hall meetings. But we would have thought that that would have passed, but it hasn't, has it?
Yeah, you would think. Ordinarily, when you lose a legislative battle, you try to make the best of things, or even in some cases, hope that the program that you didn't like works as well as it could if what's at stake is actually people's health and welfare. And, you know, that's what happened with the Medicare prescription drug benefit that was passed when George Bush was president. The Democrats didn't really like it. They thought it was too much of a giveaway to corporations. And actually, they predicted that it would end up going worse than it in fact did. But now, you know, after it was over, they basically said, okay, well, let's fix whatever needs to be fixed. But what you see with Republicans now is really an ongoing campaign that looks like it has no end to try to undermine the implementation of Obamacare. And in many cases, they're doing it in ways that just shoot themselves in the foot or cut off their nose to spite their face, however you want to put it. I mean, think about the expansion of Medicaid. The federal government is saying to states, we are going to give you a big pot of money to insure your poor citizens. Right. And at least about 20 different states, the governors and the legislatures, where they're controlled by Republicans, are saying, no, we don't want the money. We would rather see those people go without health insurance than get health insurance from the government.
What happens if you're in one of those states and then all of a sudden you have relatives in Ohio, for example, that said, no, you know what, we want the money. We were all the saber rattling, ignore all that. We do want the money. What happens if you're in a state that says, you know, we don't want your money, and that person in Ohio can get medical care, and the person in an obstructionist state, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, you name it, they can't get health care? Doesn't that lend itself to a problem for the GOP at some point?
You would think. And I think in a lot of places they feel like, there's a couple things going on. You can look at it from a political standpoint or an ideological standpoint. They're obviously just so vehemently opposed to anything that Barack Obama does that even if it makes economic sense, which it does, it'll save the state money, not having those uninsured people who are getting uncompensated care. That doesn't matter to them because they have an ideological position against it. And I think in a lot of these places, particularly in the South, the Republicans feel like they're safe politically almost no matter what they do. And so if they've got hundreds of thousands of poor people in their state without health insurance, their attitude to a great extent is screw them. We're going to keep getting reelected because we have enough Republicans in this state. And so we don't care whether or not those people end up suffering because they're not going to punish us at the polls.
Well, as I take a look at your story, it was a great quote. It says, try to imagine the government trying to build a new bridge while all throughout that bridge building you have opponents that are telling people that the bridge is going to fall down, and while they're doing that, they're throwing rocks at the people who are building the bridge. That really captures what's happening in this frenzy to try to do away with Obamacare, right? I mean, is there any better way to describe it?
Maybe not. The most extraordinary thing is now there's a campaign that's led by folks like Freedom Works, which is a Tea Party organization that is actively trying to discourage young people from buying health coverage on the exchanges where they're going to get subsidies and and would end up getting insurance, they're actually trying to convince people not to get insurance, to be uninsured and to take that risk. And they're printing up Obamacare cards. There's no such thing as an Obamacare card, but they're printing them up and you can burn them. It's really an extraordinary thing to go as far as to try to tell people you shouldn't have health insurance. I'm sure that all the people who work at FreedomWorks have a plan that they get from their employer, but they're trying to tell young people especially, because those are the people that the system needs in order to be universal so that the risk can be spread out amongst everyone. They're actually going out and trying to launch a campaign to tell them not to get health coverage, to take that unbelievable risk with their lives. Young people often feel that they're immortal and that they'll never get sick, but of course that's not true. And I just think that it's so morally abhorrent to be trying to encourage people to take those kinds of risks with their own financial lives and their futures that, it kind of makes you wonder how these folks look in the mirror at night.
Well, you have some congressmen. I mean, amazing to me. I mean, you've got Senate Minority Whip John Cornyn. I mean, this is a guy who's always out there on the right-wing frenzy issues. But even he, I mean, this is the king of screwballs. But even he has the insight to say, do we really want to continue this path? Or should we moderate our position, because I do believe it could blow up in our face? We have politicians way to the right saying that, even though this division, this attack still taking place, don't we?
Yeah, there's definitely a split within the Republican Party about how to handle this, as there is on a number of issues. Immigration is obviously the most high visibility of those. But there are some people in the Republican Party who are basically saying enough is enough. We're only hurting ourselves at this point by holding that it's now been 40 different votes in the House of Representatives to repeal Obamacare and things like this campaign to tell young people not to get insurance. There are people, even very, very conservative people in the Republican Party, who are looking at this and saying this is nuts. Not only, forget about the moral question, but just from a political standpoint, they realize that it's only going to do them damage. The Republican Party, I think that the smarter people within the party realize that if they're just going to be the party of old white men, they don't have a very bright future. And but that runs up against the kind of Tea Party rump, which is a substantial part of the base, and also elected officials who basically think that there should never be any compromise at any time. And I think sincerely believe that the path of maximum opposition is the one that is going to yield them victories in the future. I think that they're wrong, and there are a lot of people even in the Republican Party who think that they're wrong. But I don't doubt that Ted Cruz sincerely believes that if they just stand up to Obama on absolutely everything and maybe shut down the government, that it'll be good for them in the end.
Yeah, the numbers don't show it. The focus groups don't show it. The people that are really looking at it intelligently and using vehicles that rational people use to make decisions like this, it's very clear to them that this obstructionist, scorched earth idea doesn't work in shutting down government, and it might not work on the Obamacare issue. Look, one thing that you have here is, competing, you've got Congress's popularity, which is somewhere around a little less than 15% as far as favorable ratings. Obama is obviously slipping in his ratings, I think mostly due to his lack of actually delivering what he promised he would do on so many things. But at any rate, it's around 47%. Either way you look at those numbers, Obama still wins on this issue if he's out there on the bully pulpit really pushing this issue, isn't it?
Absolutely. But, if you think about it from the perspective of, say, an individual Republican congressman who's in a safe district with a lot of conservatives in it, he says to himself, I don't care if the president gets a little bit of a win out of this. I'm going to get reelected. And as long as we can hold the House of Representatives, which the Republican Party is in a very good position to do no matter how unpopular they become, then we've got one lever of power. We have the ability to stop whatever we want to stop. And there's no real reason for us not to just keep up what we've been doing. And so you have, on the one hand, people who kind of in the Republican Party who look at the national picture and say, we want to be able to win the White House again someday. But then you have another group of people who are mostly in the House who say, White House Smite House, we've got our power center here. We can hold on to it pretty much no matter what we do.
Hasn't that
we're going to
been
be true to what we believe?
Paul, hasn't that been the trend in Republican politics? As progressives have kept their eyes on this shiny thing. We must win the White House. We must win this senatorial election. The Republicans, on the other hand, kind of did what Howard Dean told Democrats they should do. State by state, they've been picking off the states. They're changing culture in politics state by state. Aren't we seeing this? We're seeing quite a success with that, especially on the gerrymandering issue. So I think you may have hit it on the head. You're going to have obstructionist politicians in places like Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, all the Florida, all the suspect states that are going to say hell with it. We're reshaping culture state by state. Right now, they control more state governments. They control the majority of state governors, and that's a trend that we see that it may be what the hell kind of attitude. What do you think?
Yeah, and there's a perfectly reasonable logic to that. In 2010, the Republicans won not only sweeping victories in Congress, but they also took control of a lot of state houses that they hadn't had control of before. And then in the post-census redistricting, they were able to solidify those districts. And so look at a state like North Carolina, where the Republicans now, for the first time since forever, control the legislature and the governorship, and they are basically going hog wild, passing one kind of thing off the wish list after another. Tax cuts, restrictions on abortion rights, restrictions on union organizing, just one thing off the Republican wish list after another. And if you're a Republican in North Carolina right now, there may be a lot of people who say that this is crazy and that there's untold damage being done. But from their perspective, they're finally getting what they wanted.
Yeah, Paul, I think you've written some, maybe I'm getting these ideas from something you've written in the past, but I recall there being the notion that that culture in society changes slowly in increments. There's no one big event that does that. It builds and it builds. One part builds on its other, and all of a sudden it moves in a particular direction. And so the Republicans have been very wise to buy into that when they started their long game approach to say, hell with the White House. It really doesn't change what I'm doing, and so we're going to build this culture. I think in the long run it's going to be very tough to reverse that. Don't you think progressives, Democrats are way behind the ball on that?
In some ways, the Republicans have certainly done a better job at that state by state, really focusing on those state legislatures to help entrench not only individuals and districts, but also those kinds of ideas. And once you pass some tax cuts, it's a lot harder to then raise taxes. And so if you can kind of seed the ground with these things in one state after another, then to a great extent, even if you end up losing the White House, you've still got you're still getting so much of what you want at the state level because you've done all that work.
Change in increments. Paul Waldman, thank you for joining me as usual. It's great material.
My pleasure.
Coming up, we'll tell you about Wall Street's latest scam to increase their profits by inflating the price of consumer goods. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll be right back with more Ring of Fire.
You're watching Free Speech TV, a network powered by the people.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Wall Street bankers have a new scam where they drive up the price of consumer goods and rake in billions of dollars in profits. Joining me to tell us how this scam works and why nobody's doing anything about it is attorney Mike Burg, a specialist in this area. So, Michael, the new Goldman Sachs Wall Street stealing scam, ugly little game that they have going, it's every week, but this is a new one. And at least it's not new, but we're just now seeing it. And it's the commodity shell game where they buy up commodities, they warehouse the commodities, they try to set the price on the market by holding those commodities in hiding in their warehouses. Lay this out for us a little bit.
Yeah, let me just tell you, first of all, it started with basically the repeal of Glass-Steagall, which unfortunately President Clinton and Phil Gramm, who's now with UBS, one of the big banks who benefits from this, when they wiped out Glass-Steagall, they allowed banks to no longer be just banks. And it opened the door for them to do this shell game with these commodities, more specifically as it relates to aluminum.
So, Mike, let me lay this out, make sure I understand this, and just correct any facts that I'm trying to simplify this thing. But you have Goldman Sachs and some of the Wall Street folks buy huge amounts of warehouse area. Then they go out and they buy copper, they buy oil, they buy whatever it is, aluminum. Let's just talk about aluminum. They store the aluminum in the warehouse. There's laws that say that you can't store metal commodities. It's against the law to do that. So what they do is they simply move the warehouse storage around. They take aluminum out from one warehouse and move it to another warehouse because they can't store it for so many days. But when they do that, they get paid for storage and they get to affect the market price. Did I basically get that right?
Exactly. And let me give you more specifics. For example, we know that, for example, Goldman Sachs bought 1.4 million tons of aluminum. And they do that, it's what's known as a spot market. So what happens is they know that the price is lower and the future price is going higher. They jump in, and in this case, $1.4 million worth of aluminum. So they have a benefit when delivery is going to be made to the spot buyers, the speculators, the investors. They're going to get a price increase that they're going to keep and put in their pocket. In addition to that, as you said, they put it into storage. And they move it from storage facility to storage facility, and they charge, in this particular case, approximately 46 cents with regard to each ton that they're storing. And that sounds like, well, that seems like a legitimate storage charge, but in reality, what they're doing is keeping that off the market, and that storage charge in and of itself is approximately $1.5 billion that they're putting in their pocket adversely to people who are buying those commodities.
Okay, so first of all, the law says Goldman Sachs, first of all, you're a bank. Okay, you're not supposed to be in the storage commodity business, but what they do is they did the same thing it's not just Goldman Sachs. We see it happening with companies over in Europe where they go in, they buy just as much warehouse as they can possibly buy. And then the other part of this is when they store up the aluminum, the people who are in the can business, the people who make cars or airplanes or manufacture all types of manufactured goods, they end up paying huge amounts. I think it's $200 billion that taxpayers end up footing the bill for because of this commodity game that's played by people like Goldman Sachs. And Mike, I guess the worst thing about it is Goldman Sachs doesn't make anything. We saw with the CDO toxic trash deal with synthetics and CDOs, they didn't make anything. They simply scammed the system. They simply read the laws. Their accountants and lawyers figure out how can we scam the system. That's what they did with CDOs and synthetics. This is the same thing, isn't it? They're scamming a system.
It is.
The system says you may not do this. So what they do, if the system says you can store this aluminum in your big warehouse for 65 days, at the end of 65 days, they take the aluminum out of that warehouse and move it to another warehouse, and they take aluminum from that other warehouse and move it into that storage. I mean, and we let them do this. I mean, it's costing taxpayers huge amounts of money, but we're letting them do it.
Well, first of all, they're in the money business. They're not in any other business. They're trying to figure out how they can scam the system and basically bilk the public out of the money. When you talk about aluminum, think about all the canned goods that are made out of aluminum. Pepsi, beer, all kinds of things. That drives the price up. So the consumers are paying it. The consumers are the ones getting hit, and the government is allowing these banks, and specifically Goldman Sachs and others, to do this. And they're, as you said, they run afoul of the law, and if the law says they can't do it, they run in and get the law changed. They are running the government.
Well, okay, so the real problem to me is that the few number of politicians actually doing anything about this. We know that, yes, on the book it's legal, but we know that at the end of the day it's costing taxpayers, consumers $200 billion in these types of scams. We know that Goldman Sachs and these companies are doing it with copper. They're doing it with aluminum. They're doing it with oil. They're doing it with zinc, all types of stored commodities. And you only at this point have Sherrod Brown and Alan Grayson really out front saying, wait a second, this is legal, this is legal, but look what you're doing. Don't we need to change the laws?
Well, it's unbelievable. Thank goodness we have Senators Brown and Grayson doing it, because follow the money. These politicians are getting their pockets lined by the big banks, Goldman Sachs, unbelievably contributor to all these senators' campaigns, to the presidential campaigns. Money is costing the American public in the political system. And we need more people who are going to stand up and say, you know what, this is wrong, and we're going to stop it. We need to go ahead and we need to have Glass-Steagall back in pose. Let's make banks be banks. Let's let that be everything to everybody.
Instead of that, don't we have this administration right now actually with a straight face telling us that Larry Summers needs to be involved as Treasury Secretary? I mean, this is all being controlled by the Fed, right? I mean, the Fed's the one that has the ability to say, banks, you may not do this because this is beyond your scope as a bank. Now, you put Larry Summers in charge of that. What happens?
When Larry Summers was Secretary of the Treasury, he was involved in allowing these things to happen. Now, Obama, at least the rumors we're hearing, is that he's going to be put up to be the chairman of the Fed. It is unbelievable. It's
not just rumor. You had Obama actually just a full all-out support of Larry Summers. Now, we know that Larry Summers is one of the reasons, he comes from the Greenspan, Alan Greenspan School. He is one of the people most responsible for the burn down of the mortgage industry, for the recession that we're in right now, for the horrible economy we're in right now. Larry Summers was exhibit A for all that. And you have this administration saying, oh, no, wait, this man is brilliant. He's from Harvard. He has all these great ideas. Let's let him in and control the Fed. If he controls the Fed on an issue like this, isn't it predictable what he would do?
Absolutely. He will be with the big banks. He will be with all the big oil companies. He is their arm. He's always been speaking on their behalf. And quite frankly, it should be an embarrassment to the Obama administration to have put him forward like this. And the American public has to rise up and tell President Obama and the administration he cannot be involved with the Fed, because trust me, after what we've seen happen in the past, as you've talked about, we're going to be in deep trouble. The American public and the consumer and the taxpayer are going to be paying the price, while greedy Wall Street and Goldman Sachs and the other big banks are just raking in the money with these kind of scams.
Again, this is called, let's not lose sight of this story, this is called the warehouse shuffle. And it's where if you can imagine a bank owning so much warehouse that there's nobody that can compete with them. It's the same thing that we saw the Koch brothers do with oil. If you recall that story, the Koch brothers bought huge tankers to control commodity prices. They would take the tankers, they would fill them up in refineries, they would store it offshore. When they saw the price changing in Asia, they would take the oil to Asia or Europe. And what we see happening here is no different. Here you have these banks that absolutely understand that this causes it causes, when you got $200 billion worth of added cost to something like this, the banks know that. And to have this administration say, gee whiz, we're going to allow this to happen because we've completely lost control of Wall Street. Isn't that part of the problem, that there is really no control of Wall Street at this point?
Absolutely no control, and you know what? This administration has no interest in controlling them. They've allowed it to go on and on. Not only the $200 billion you're talking about, but they also allow them to make $500 million, $500 million just on the storage charges. So you talk about the shell game moving from one place to another. It's all in favor of the big banks, and this administration and this Congress has no interest in doing anything to stop the large banks. Let them be banks again. Make loans. That's what they should be out there doing, not scamming the public with this shuffle in terms of storage facilities.
One thing, if you're listening to this broadcast, one thing you can do is don't deal with the big banks. Deal with your local bank if you can. Don't you advise that all the time, Mike? Anyway, had you been dealing with your local bank with so many things in this last in this last burn down, go down the street. Find out who in your community is the community bank. Deal with those people, because those aren't the people that are trying to destroy democracy and run capitalism aground. Those are the people you can deal with. You don't need to deal with Bank of America. You don't need to deal with Goldman Sachs types. Deal with people that you can trust. Isn't that the first thing you tell a client when they come to your office and they've been scammed by some big bank?
Absolutely. It's unbelievable, Mike. This Larry Summers thing, when I just had a chuckle because he is the fox in the hen house. He's the guy who he's the least trustworthy guy they could put in that position.
Mike Burg, thank you for joining me. I hope the Obama administration will listen to sound minds, rational thinkers, when they say Larry Summers would be an absolute destruction of any regulation we have in place, anything we've done as far as filling that gap since the last burn down, any progress we've made. Larry Summers single-handedly will turn that around because we know his history. Mike Burg, thank you for joining me, okay?
Thank you, Mike.
Coming up, we'll find out why the golden days of conservative radio might be coming to an abrupt end. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll be right back with more Ring of Fire. You're witness to a political coup taking place right in front of your damn eyes. That caliber of evil needed to be held accountable in courtrooms. Billionaire mad money wasn't enough to buy democracy. Legislators don't have enough sense to think for themselves. They let Alec do it. Here at Ring of Fire, the truth is our only agenda, so we're able to bring you the stories that mainstream media just ignored or completely got wrong. Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Conservative talkers like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity are hemorrhaging stations and advertisers. Meanwhile, Fox News viewers are dropping off in droves. Joining me now to talk about the downfall of conservative media is progressive radio and TV host David Pakman. So David, is it possible that there is a meaningful shift taking place where right-wing talk radio is maybe at risk? Maybe we have a chance to preserve democracy. What's your take on it? Is it much ado about nothing, or do you see a trend?
No, even if Rush Limbaugh specifically still gets a new contract and doesn't have to shift to a new syndicator, there's definitely something important going on here. I mean, number one, there's been this idea for a long time that AM talk radio simply lends itself better to conservative ideas just by its very nature. Even if we accept that as true, that's a problem for right-wing radio that depends on those platforms, because internet in cars and increased internet access, broadly speaking, is going to make it more and more difficult for people like Limbaugh to retain an audience. And that's why he keeps touting this, oh, I have about 20 million people who listen to me. Those are kind of old numbers. They're also not really based on people listening for even a minimum of 15 minutes. So this could be a real thing.
Well, okay, so the 20 million myth is something, again, I always come back to traditional corporate media simply can't ask the right questions. They get the press release, 20 million. That myth has been around forever, And of course, you've had Limbaugh riding that myth forever. But when you really look at the numbers, there's been analysis that it could be as little as 3 million at any given time during his program. And I think there's another part of it, David. I want to get your take on it. Here you have the Sandra Fluke story that caused advertisers to say, you know, we don't want to be a part of this loudmouth, toxic character. We don't want any more crazy uncle talk. I'm tired of it. And so you had advertisers that have in the first quarter, I think the number that I saw was something like $3 million in lost revenue simply because of the boycott. Add to that, the guy's making $20 million a year. What do those numbers mean to you going forward with a guy like Limbaugh?
Well, Rush Limbaugh is fine financially. He doesn't have to worry about his finances. We don't have to worry about his finances. But there's a really important thing built into these advertisers moving away, which is for a long time, right-wing controversial radio hosts have relied on the idea that they are really good at bringing customers to advertisers. Above and beyond the number of people, they're just very good at convincing their audience to buy. And what a lot of these advertisers are figuring out is that if you have like a conservative-oriented product, if it's some gun holster and you're specifically advertising it in red states, fine, you might do really well on right-wing radio. But for most advertisers, if you're selling insurance, if you reach, say, 10 million people through Rush Limbaugh, or you reach 10 million people by putting together ads on 3 shows that get 3 million each, you're going to get roughly the same return, and you can avoid the controversy of being associated with Rush. People are learning that now.
Yeah, aren't we also seeing, David, I've seen lately, and it's a logical move. I mean, first of all, we begin with the idea that there clearly is a demographic shift. Rush Limbaugh is experiencing the same problem that the Republicans are experiencing with a demographic shift. I mean, you've got millennials and Xers, even very young baby boomers who just don't want to listen to crazy hate talk anymore. And so what ends up happening is the Republican Party is seeing this where it comes to the threat to their party. The same thing has got to hold true with right-wing radio because it's only that crazy fringe of the GOP that's listening to them.
It is, and there's different types of listeners. From Howard Stern's movie Private Parts, when the program director walks in and says, you know, people who like you are listening 45 minutes, but people who don't like you are listening for 3 hours because they really want to see what you're going to say next. That's not really happening with Rush Limbaugh. You know, there's so many, like, for example, I cover Rush every once in a while, but I don't need to sit there and listen. There's services that monitor Rush and let journalists know when something really worth discussing has happened. So that Howard Stern effect doesn't seem to be something that's really happening with Rush.
The demographic shift that is affecting the Republican Party, part of it is that you know, you could do if you take the prototype, it's old, it's angry, it's easily excitable, it's people that are so willing to buy into the conspiracy theories, the paranoia, and that's all driven by fear and anger. I think probably in the business, Rush is probably the best at bringing out that fear, bringing out that anger. But what about all the other flying monkeys out there that are just kind of occupying that space with Rush? What does that mean to the Michael Savage types? What do you see happening there? Is there enough room to go around?
It's a really big pie. That's the reality. So even if we want to point out the flaws of any individual broadcaster, it is a really big pie. But one of the problems that is happening now is once you get past the top tier, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, the Republican Party has really become split into these 3 groups: the Tea Party, the pro-business types, and the evangelical religious types, who have different priorities. They all vote for Republicans when it comes down to it on the presidential ballot, but they have very different priorities, and that's actually making it more difficult once you don't have the name recognition of someone like Rush or Hannity.
Isn't one part of the story is even though you may see diminishing numbers coming out of right-wing hate talk, they still affect the primaries in state and local elections. In other words, you have their ability to be able to move 3 or 4 million votes by their every day, the Fox drum, the right-wing Rush drum, it does affect those primaries, and in the end, the craziest of the crazy candidate benefits from that, at least at the primary level. I mean, we see it happening with the Tea Partiers all over the country, where they are affecting these crazy primary elections, and you're ending up with people like that simply can't win in the general election. Again, that's part of the threat to the GOP, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And on the one side, a lot of those candidates end up being completely unviable when it actually gets to a mainstream or final election. Fortunately, though, for all the power that the right-wing radio talk shows wield, particularly when it comes to primaries, there's the demographic shifts that are happening, which are making it, it's forcing literally the Republican Party in many parts of the country to have to moderate a little bit, and then that shift will allow the progressive candidate to be a little bit more progressive. So I don't know where it's going to shake out. 2014 will be interesting. We'll see who has more power here. Do the demographic shifts outweigh right-wing local radio?
Well, the question is, I mean, if we've looked historically, the easily excitable, angry, white, pale, stale male voter is easier to get to the primaries, especially midterm elections. I mean, they will turn out in midterm elections in droves, while you'll have the progressives that historically stay home. The interesting thing about it is the progressives have the machine, the infrastructure to do that, but you can get a guy like Rush Limbaugh or Michael Savage or Fox News on the air, and they can get those voters out. And I don't know how the Republican Party overcomes that. It isn't part of the thing that we're seeing. There's this move towards sports casting. It's kind of, you have the broadcasters out there say, you know what? We don't want to take any chances anymore. So aren't you seeing a combination of sports casting and local broadcasting that's kind of moving into the AM, FM kind of slot?
It's completely happening. It's infotainment. They're taking a lot of pages out of the sportscasting notebook. I was just reading NFL football now will have the Matrix cam where you can see replays in 360 degrees. I wouldn't be surprised if that gets integrated into presidential debates, because it's becoming almost impossible to tell the difference in many cases between two things: news and opinion journalism, but also between actual news and infotainment. You and I have talked about this before. The lines are increasingly blurred, and all of these pyrotechnics and visual stuff that's being added is only making it more difficult to figure out what you're watching.
Yeah. The sports seems to attract that demographics of, say, 25 to 53, which seems to be the sweet spot for radio demographics. The local broadcasting, it seems to me, it's almost a smart move by somebody like Cumulus. Cumulus, again, they're paying Rush $20 million a year. They know that local broadcasting, together with that local ambassador, I guess you could call it, that person who has the local medical show, the local legal show, the local political show, they're right in that community. They can be the ambassador of that show. Plus, add to that sports broadcasting has kind of a ubiquitous quality about it. You don't really make anybody mad. You have fun even when you are mad. And I see Cumulus moving that way. I see Comcast moving that way. Clear Channel. I think that's the trend, don't you?
Yeah, it definitely is a trend, and then the question will be, is that going to leave a hole for alternative news and opinion programming to surface, or is it going to have the opposite effect, which is that because those big corporations get so locked in to whoever's been doing the news and political opinion for so long that they don't even consider changing those people? I don't know which way it's going to go. It's really a new thing right now, and it could be a great thing, but it also could just lock us into the status quo for 10 or 20 more years.
David, one thing obviously that seems extremely important is this void that's, this movement away from terrestrial radio to internet radio. Progressive Voices is a good example. It kind of consolidates all of the progressive talkers in the business. Don't you see that? Or the Young Turks Network, even by way of by way of YouTube. What is the trend you see there?
Yeah, the trend away from terrestrial radio is there. I'm doing everything I can to capitalize and prepare for further shifts away from terrestrial radio. But when I think of my own business model, I just had a meeting with someone and I told them basically what you just said, and they said, David, you're right, but you have to remember economies of scale. Almost everyone has or has access to a regular radio, and while more and more people have internet, not everybody has it yet, and regular radio still represents a huge audience, way bigger than what we're actually getting in terms of podcasts and that type of thing. So I'm trying to strike the balance right now, and hopefully independent broadcasters can find a good way to do that.
Well, I mean, if you think, it's almost the historical analysis is the move away from fireside chats on the radio to television. I mean, that's kind of where we are right now. But it seemed overnight there was this rapid change, this move away from, radio to television. Don't we even, what we're seeing now more and more, which I think is helpful, is when you buy a new car, you have internet radio in the car. You have, because they have to appeal to Xers, they have to appeal to millennials, and by way of the market being driven on those ideas alone, are you optimistic in the next 5 years you may see a change?
I am. I mean, there's a generation of people now, and I'm not really part of it, but because I rarely listen to terrestrial radio anymore, I'm kind of being sucked into it, that doesn't understand the concept of, as you drive around, you start to lose some stations. That concept is foreign to a lot of people who are consuming media right now. You either have it on your iPhone and you've got a connection through 3G, or you've got internet radio in the car or satellite radio, and this concept of local media, for better or for worse, is starting to kind of evaporate for a lot of people.
David Pakman, thank you for joining me. Great material as usual. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
When we come back, we'll find out how progressives are using the Tea Party's own tactics to take the right wing down. I'm Mike Papantonio. You're watching Ring of Fire, and we'll be right back.
Tune into Free Speech TV for Democracy Now!, a national, independent, award-winning news program bringing you people and perspectives rarely seen on corporate media.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. The reason the Tea Party was so successful is because they built around anger. But now progressives are becoming angry too, and they have a plan. Joining me now to talk about this is Farron Cousins, executive editor of the Trial Lawyer magazine. Farron, have the Birkenstock Democrats actually decided maybe they can fight back? Is this a new trend here?
It would appear so. I mean, after years of trying to do what they call these stealth operations to get their message out, they finally decided that the best way to do this fight against Republicans is come out in public, take the gloves off, and hit them with everything they've got. This group, Americans United for Change, just in this last week or so, has launched this massive campaign where on their website they're listing all of these events, town hall forums, fundraisers, anything that Republicans and Tea Partiers and even some Democrats are going to be doing. And they're actually giving people, average citizens, the talking points, the questions to go out there and ask these candidates, these politicians, the tough questions that for years and years nobody's asked.
Isn't this what the Tea Partiers did? I mean, they had all that Koch money. I mean, the billionaire inheritance babies were giving the Tea Partiers all this money, and they would give them talking points. Because these weren't original thoughts. We were hearing some of these boneheads, speak at these town hall meetings, but they would go in and they would have very specific questions that had been written out for them, and it was just designed to make the candidate uncomfortable, to embarrass the candidate, to take the entire town hall meeting and turn it around to something that was non-productive. And so now you say the Democrats are copying that same attack, that same page. Is that kind of what we're going to see here?
That is, and the Tea Party, as horrible as they've been, they were wildly successful with that. In fact, during the whole healthcare debate back in 2009, they completely hijacked the message away from Democratic candidates. They turned it away from universal healthcare to this Obamacare tax on employers, employees. They turned it into a tax issue and said, you're going to pay more. This is going to hurt everybody. It's going to shut down small businesses. And Democrats ended up on the defensive, backed in a wall, and had no idea what to say or how to address these things that were completely untrue, but that became the narrative. We lost control of the message, and we let these Tea Party crazies, controlled by the Koch brothers and other big money interests, control that message, and to this day, we haven't gotten it back.
Yeah, and the media, of course, they are always looking for the low-hanging fruit. And so the media, all the media would catch is the 2 or 3 questions that incited disorder in the town hall meeting, and that would be the headline story. Well, if you were to say what do you think that the new Democratic approach here to town hall meetings, what do you think the questions would be of candidates, Republican candidates that are showing up to kind of talk about all the good they've done? If you were to guess what it is that the Tea Party, the Democrats are going to do with that town hall meetings, what would be your call?
Well, first of all, I think people need to get out there and ask these Republican politicians point blank, why do you support something like the Keystone XL pipeline that's going to create maybe 30 permanent American jobs and raise our energy prices? Why do you believe it's okay to cut Social Security and Medicare payments to senior citizens who already can't get by on what they have? Why do you think it's okay to give corporations billions of dollars in tax breaks when they ship all their money overseas to the Bahamas and places like that, and yet the minimum wage has been stagnant for years? Why do you think that's okay? Why is this corporation more important than everybody else in your constituency? Those are the questions that the media would never ask, but people should be asking.
I'd love to have you at all the town hall meetings, Farron. The question that I have is, are you going to have the average citizen be able to show up and articulate concepts about why the Republicans have given the Wall Street virtually everything they've wanted in the last 12 years, why the Republicans were so bent on deregulation that brought us the crisis that we're in right now economically. I mean, those are questions that they take a little bit of insight, they take a little bit of background to understand. Do you think this is something that the average citizen out there can grab a hold of and say, yeah, I can show up at a town hall meeting and I can get something done as far as inciting some truth?
I do. I mean, I think the Democratic voting base is very intelligent. Spend a few minutes on this Americans United for Change website. They provide all the talking points. They even give you the questions to help guide you. But let me add too, if you're going to do this, if you're going to go to one of these town halls and ask the tough questions, bring somebody with you, bring a group of people, and have somebody take their phone and film it. Film the reaction of the congressman, put it on YouTube, let it go viral, just like Romney's 47% comment. If you want to take them down, show the world what they are. That's what they have to do.
Isn't that the importance of it? It's not so much that at that town hall meeting you have actually embarrassed the Republican talking head. It is that we now get that message out to tens and hundreds of thousands of people, and we start seeing what they're really like. What is their real message? The thing, if I were the Republicans, I think this go around, I might narrow the number of times that I have a town hall meeting. Do you think they're inclined to do that?
I don't think so. They are counting on this Democratic apathy that we see so often, or this Democratic, weakness. We've been too willing to sit back, let them control the message, and for us just to react. But now we're finally taking action. We have groups that understand you can't sit back and wait on the sidelines for something to happen. You have to go out there, you have to take control, and it's not a party movement. This is a, ground up, grassroots, pure citizens movement, and that's how these things become sustainable, is that it's not necessarily attached to a political party. This is a movement of citizens, and I think that is going to keep this thing going, and I think that is going to give it its power. It's not controlled by a party or a corporation.
Let's hope so, Farron. Farron Cousins, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
This fall, the U.S. Supreme Court could hear arguments on a case that would make Citizens United look like the Bill of Rights, and it would completely hand our elections over to corporations. Joining me now to talk about that case and what it means for our democracy is attorney Howard Nations. So Howard, we thought the U.S. Supreme Court really dinged democracy really bad in Citizens United. What they're getting ready to look at in the McCutcheon case is it makes that look like a walk through the park. Tell us about that case.
Well, Citizens United, as it turns out, was just a warm-up. Now we're down to McCutcheon versus FEC, which is attacking the overall contribution limitations. And the law now is that under the FEC rules, under the 2013-2014 election cycle, a donor is limited to $123,200 to all political committees Then there are sublimits of $48,600 to candidates, $74,600 to parties or PACs. This decision, McCutcheon decision, is raising the issue as to whether overall contribution limits or aggregate limits are unconstitutional as a denial of free speech.
Okay, so let me get this right. Right now, you have, of course, the regulations for elections have already been just obliterated with Citizens United.
Right.
So the only thing we have out there is saying you can't take all of this money, these limitations, and then aggregate it and put it with, say, the Republican Party. You can't do that now and get away with it because it's illegal. So now what they want to go in is they want to say, no, we want to aggregate. We think it's our First Amendment right to do that. What is the impact of that? What happens with that?
Well, it would effectively eliminate individual contribution caps. They say we're not attacking individual contribution caps, we're attacking aggregate contribution caps. But if you have you could shift among fundraising committees. Now, Buckley, the Supreme Court in Buckley looked at this some years ago and said that aggregate contribution limits are an extension of individual caps. And they specifically said that things such as $1 million contributions give the appearance of corruption. And in some cases, as with the Nixon administration, it led to actual corruption. But the RNC is saying, no, Citizens United has effectively abolished limits, because now you can contribute to super PACs or you can contribute to non-disclosing nonprofits, and as a result, many states have had to raise their limits for their individual candidates because they're having to fight those super PACs.
Well, we know that Citizens United, of course, we've seen in the last elections, it puts the elections in the hands of corporations. I don't know how you can get anything more extreme than this. I mean, as far as saying a corporation can hand, I think the aggregate would be somewhere around $5 million, maybe
right.
$6 million in aggregate, that you can just say that to Republicans here, take this, do what you want with it, and that is putting that corporation or that billionaire inheritance baby that nowadays runs elections, you're putting them at odds with the average citizen who, if they can give $25, that's remarkable most of the time. Where does this end, Howard? How does it possibly end with this Supreme Court majority that we have right now?
Well, there are three possibilities for the Supreme Court in this case. First of all, they can strike down aggregate limits, say they don't exist anymore, they're unconstitutional. Secondly, they can uphold aggregate limits and things continue as they are. The mid-ground for the Supreme Court would be to uphold the constitutional of aggregate limits, but hold that the limits are so low as to be unconstitutional. If that happens, then Congress would have to set the new limits following the Supreme Court mandate.
Well, Howard, you've talked about the fact that our only way out of this, I think you were one of the first people really in the business talking about the seriousness of the need for a constitutional amendment to change all of this. Is that really, with the public's reaction to what's happening to them, do you think that that's really an outside possibility? I mean, doesn't that become more of a probability every day as we see corporations now take control of our election process?
I'm afraid it's wishful thinking, Mike. I cannot imagine 35 states agreeing on anything these days.
Well, if you don't have the 35 states agreeing to, if you don't have that number of states agreeing, you certainly can go to the polls. And I'm wondering whether this McCutcheon decision just might be enough to do that once people understand how crazy the impact is on these aggregate numbers. What's your thought on that?
Well, the case is going to be argued on October 8th, just in time for the 2014 midterms. If we see in the 2014 midterms, if they knock down these aggregate limits, and we see an even greater flood of money, and we see individual politicians being bought by individual donors,
we might have a possibility.
You may have a possibility.
Howard Nations, thanks for following this story. My bet is when I look at this majority, they're going to grant this aggregate expansion of campaign money. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Mike.
That's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringofireradio.com or on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio and on Facebook. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire.